With Season 2 of RE0 imminent, I decided to compile a list of most of the remaining mysteries that have been introduced so far. Why is Emilia both childlike but also prone to old-fashioned speech? Who hired Elsa to disrupt Emilia's path to the throne, and why do both of them wear a similar decoration in their hair? Who carved the information about Flugel's origin into his tree? As we pored over the series this past spring, we found that its world building was a kind of lore hydra. Cut off one question, and two more will appear in its place. Many theories and interlocking speculations came out of our streams and Discord discussions, and I've collected the questions behind most of them here. This will not be perfectly exhaustive, but will cover a lot of the things we know we are missing, the known unknowns of RE0, along with the occasional suggestion of how these questions could be interrelated. This information is limited to all anime-only parts of the canon, the director's cut of Season 1, the two OVAs, Memory Snow and The Frozen Bond, and the Season 1 shorts. We will not include any information from the source material or from Season 2 promotional media, and so that I ask that you will keep such references out of any comments as well. There's so much to cover that I've put them into 8 general categories: Timescales, Mansion Characters, Captial Characters, How Magic Works, Fate, Emilia, Satella and the Sins, and any leftover mysteries from The Frozen Bond. First up, just to get it out of the way, we have a lot of unspecified timescales, both in the far and recent past. We don't know how much time elapsed between Satella's birth and Satella's rise, between her rise and her sealing, and between her sealing and the present. The only clue is that Satella is supposed to be the origin of maw beasts, hence the way they are driven crazy by her scent. The white whale is discovered to be a maw beast, and Kruge gives us the information that the whale has been around for 400 years. So, some part of those earlier questions about timeline must fall around 400 years ago, though who knows if that would have been early or late in Satella's time. Frozen Bond introduced several unclear timelines of its own after revealing that Emilia was frozen in a crystal of ice before Puck found her. However, we don't learn how long she was in the ice, how old she was before going into the crystal, and how long ago the freezing took place. It's not clear how long the elves of the forest have been frozen, and whether Emilia's own freezing began around the same time or not. We don't even know if this happens before or after Satella was on the scene, though the unfreezing and the events of the OVA obviously happened after the world was fearful of the Witch of Envy. It is unclear how long between Emilia being woken from the ice and the events of Frozen Bond that begin with her encounter with the family, after which she wears the little girl's cape as her own. Likewise, between that event and Puck beginning to be a regular visitor. Into the more recent past, we don't know how long between the end of Frozen Bond and the present. However, there are some aspects of Emilia that may give a rough idea, and we'll talk about that in her section. Also unclear is how long since the royal family disappeared or died out, and how long the royal selection process has thus been running, though we can infer that it hasn't been too long. Related to this is how long Emilia has been at the Mathers estate as Roz's guest. The events of Memory Snow will tell us that the magical release period is something that happens twice a year on average, yet Emilia was trying to hide it from Roz, suggesting that it had not yet occurred while she was staying there. If that is accurate, then she has been there less than 6 months when the story begins, though that could easily mean 1 month or 5. And I have some questions about that timescale as well, which we will deal with later. But let's stay on the topic of the mansion, and next explore questions about the Mathers domain and those who live there. Betty is the first mansion denizen we meet, and her initial encounter with Subaru drives home that she is not the little drill loli she looks like. She's not human, but what is she? Calling Puck Ni-chan might suggest that she is also a great spirit, as well as the way she forms a contract with Subaru in one loop, and apparently has an existing contract to protect the mansion's library. If so, why can she stay in her corporal form all the time when Puck regularly exhausts his mana, gets sleepy, and disappears? Possibly related to this, what is the nature of her contract to protect the library? Is it even with Roz, or maybe with the mansion itself? She won't evacuate with the rest in the last arc, as she'll indicate that she can't go. and Puck will imply that she is probably safest where she is. Betty is powerful enough to face off against Roz and Ram simultaneously in the middle arc, and yet when Ram catches up to her and Subaru later, her comments about being in the forest rather than the mansion imply that Betty's power may weaken outside the mansion grounds. Are contracts capable of restraining magic as well? It's also unclear how long Betty has been alive and how long she's been protecting that library. She'll tell us that only Puck is older, and the interactions and comments between her and Roz suggest their interests may not be perfectly aligned. For all we know, she was guarding the library before he even took possession of it. One of the neat things about the time rewinding structure in RE0 is that we get to see sides of characters that we would miss otherwise, and that in the surviving timeline they do not know that they have revealed. Betty has two notable ones. The first is when she contracts with Subaru for protection, even though she knows the scent of the witch lays heavily on him. She maintains this contract even when it brings her into conflict with the Lord of the Manor, but she surely knew it might, and so why indulge Subaru? At the very end of that loop, she is trying to get him to escape, to at least have him die where she can't see, or else she'll have bad dreams. This gets echoed in another rewound loop later on after Emilia is killed in front of Subaru and he asks Betty to kill him in turn. She will get angry at this suggestion and will further make a comment about how she is not like Roz. She won't do anything just to secure herself a future, which implies that Roz would do anything and that she disapproves. But what's more, she'll say that she's had enough of pain, suffering, and fear, and unceremoniously ejects Subaru with Emilia's corpse. Yet at the end of that tirade, she'll say what she did in the contract loop, urging him to at least die where she can't see him. It would seem that some kind of terrible shadow lies across Betty's past. What happened, and was she victim or perpetrator? She fills us in on the Witch of Envy when most everyone else shrinks from the conversation. Is her knowledge actually first-hand? Could this explain her distress from the past? Her door-crossing magic and Subaru's interaction with it also raise a possibly related question, but we'll deal with that in a later section. Next, let's talk about the twins, Ram and Rim. We learn quite a bit of their backstory compared to everyone else in the mansion, but some questions are raised nonetheless. For starters, who is the blonde maid at the Mathers mansion in Rim's flashback? And where is she now? Considering the end of the director's cut and how much work Rim did in the mansion, there is probably a labor shortfall now. Will this blonde maid return? Will there be other new workers to compensate? The two of them came to the mansion in the first place because their village and families were destroyed and Roz took them in. However, what did the witch's cult want with the village of Oni in the first place? Just extermination? Or is there something they possessed? Is this the exact same group of cultists that is later running around with Betelgeuse? Or is that uniform rather universal? And how did Roz end up coming to their rescue anyway? Roz is rather full of mysteries himself, and one is related to Ram. The two of them will engage in some late-night conversations that don't seem exactly like a master-servant relationship, and we'll learn that he is regularly expending his mana into Ram where her missing horn would be. When this subject is brought up in Memory Snow, Ram will blush furiously enough to have her skin match her hair. So what exactly is going on here that she should react so? Roz will also feel comfortable enough with Ram to share what seems to be his big goal, to kill the dragon. It's not clear why he wishes this, or whether this is a secret between just him and Ram. But it may possibly answer another question, which is why has Roz chosen to back Emilia as a candidate for the throne? Memory Snow will reference a fight between Roz and Puck when he came to find her, which suggests that he sought her out. However, he had to be well aware of the consternation that would come with backing a half-elf, and the possible negative attention it would bring to his domain. Why was he okay with the chance of these outcomes? In fact, considering the possibility that they would come under attack, why is he frequently absent? He leaves during the last loop of the mansion arc to meet with someone for whom he must dress in a more standard fashion. Who is this person, and why was this meeting not pressing enough for him to leave in the previous loops of this arc? He is also absent during all of the disastrous cultist attacks on his domain, and yet they are able to reach him to meet up with the half of the refugees going to the sanctuary with Ram. Where is he at such a critical time? And relatedly, what is this sanctuary? Is it on his land? Somewhere distant? Even in the same country? We only know that it must be in a different direction than the capital. Getting back to his sense of fashion, he is sometimes rendered with what looks like a devil or dragon's tail in his attire. Ram and Rem even made sure to sculpt that into their statue. He doesn't physically have a tail though, as Subaru can verify after their close encounter. His family crest appears to be an eagle or similar, as we can see on Emilia's sleeves and atop the columns in his garden, but what he wears definitely isn't a bird's tail. Lastly for Roz, why is he so secretly pleased when Subaru pipes up in the royal selection? Subaru's making a huge gaffe, and Emilia clearly needed no help to hold her own, yet we are meant to see that maniacal grin. Is it Subaru's action that pleases Roz, or the chaos he will create? Roz seems at times to be deliberately written to keep us from trusting him. Moments like this are meant to influence our reading of his character and lead us to ask the biggest question about him. Who or what is he loyal to, if he has any loyalty beyond his goal? At the end of Season 1, there are some minor complications caused by the letter sent to Emilia turning out to be blank, but it is never explained why this happens. Since they take the time to fill us in on the cultural implications of a blank letter, it obviously has some significance, but the season ends with it a forgotten mystery. After the extra scene at the end of the director's cut, the thought arose that it may be blank because Rem was the one who actually wrote it. When she was vanished by fog in the earlier loops, we saw that there could be some physical changes when someone is erased, as in her room, which no longer shows signs of occupation. However, we don't have anything else which would suggest that she wrote it. The letter is supposed to come from Kruj, and Subaru suggests that he was behind the writing itself, so it remains a curiosity that we are not supposed to miss. Now, the Mansion arc overall is about stopping the curse and surviving the suspicions of the twins, but despite the positive conclusion, we never learn who is behind the curse attack. Betty tells us that curses are a form of magic associated with shamans from a northern kingdom, and it will later seem plain that a shaman of some variety is behind the Mob East activities. The little girl with the purple braid is involved in everything that happened and yet disappears afterwards. But who is she? Where did she come from? And why attack the Mather's domain in such a manner? There didn't seem to be a specific target in mind with the curse, as Rem will die in Subaru's place in one of the loops. Was it meant to undermine Roz and or Emilia's chance of winning the royal selection? As Ram will say later on, when the people of a domain suffer any loss, its lord is held liable. Kruj will echo something similar when her aid is requested, that placing your own domain's survival in the hands of another lord calls into question your ability to rule the nation. So is this attack related to the later cultist attack, or to the earlier shenanigans with Elsa, which we will get to as well. Finally, something that is not limited to the Mansion characters, but we might as well bring it up. What is going on with the unique pupils that some characters have? Betty's are the most obvious, shaped like crosses or perhaps even butterflies, but we know that she isn't human. That could be enough to explain it, except that we have several other instances. Emilia's are the example we see all the time, but both Elsa and Priscilla have unique, non-black elements to their pupils as well. This isn't particular to candidates, as Felt, Kruj, and Anastasia have normal pupils. It's also not unique to spiritual arts users, as Reinhard and Julius have normal pupils as well. Betty and Puck may or may not be the same kind of being, but Puck has normal pupils as well, both in his cuter and his Beast of the End form. Same goes for the demi-humans we meet, both of the humans with ears and tails varieties, and the more fully bestial ones. Perhaps there is a clue in the person of Rem, who ordinarily has normal black pupils like the rest. During the last loop of the Mansion arc, she will have the atypical pupils while she is in her Oni state, which happens again during the fight with the White Whale. The fact that hers come and go means it's not purely a character design choice. Does it hint at power held by the characters thus marked? And why are all these examples female characters? We have a whole section on magic, so for now let's skip that and let's talk about some of these capital characters. Let's begin with Priscilla. Does the world actually work in a way that favors her like she frequently states, or is that some kind of megalomaniac delusion? Is she superhumanly strong, as her 2 physical rebukes of Subaru may suggest? Why does Emilia hide from her gaze when they run into each other, and why does she feel the need to question Subaru about whether or not he knows her immediately afterwards? Why does Priscilla get so bent out of shape over Subaru going along with her foot-licking suggestion? She who was otherwise not so easily perturbed, even while being mugged. And what about her companion Night Owl? Why the unusual attire? And what is under his helmet? Priscilla suggests that he has a ruined face. Is that all that he is hiding? After all, he doesn't want to be called by his full name. Then there's our other capital character with unique pupils, the Bowel Hunter Elsa. Just like with the shaman attack in the second arc, we never find out who is behind her actions. She indicates that she had a client who hired her, so perhaps she isn't even aware of the motives behind the contract. However, since either the insignia or Emilia's death were acceptable outcomes, it would appear to be someone who wanted her out of the royal selection rather than simply wanting her dead because she's a half-elf. The best clue we have about Elsa is that she uses a weapon common to the northern kingdoms. Shaman and their curses are also from the north. Is there some connection between Elsa's attacks and the later attacks on the Mather's domain? There is one detail of her design that is also curious, the thing I mentioned in the introduction. Elsa has a black rose hair decoration that seems to be just like the one Emilia wears in white. Diversity of character design is a real strength of the series, so I find it unlikely the similarity has no meaning behind it. However, I can't guess what it is. We only know that Emilia picked up her version sometime after the events of Frozen Bond. Alongside the whole affair with Elsa were Felt and Old Man Ramji. Felt has no family she knows of, with Ramji an adopted guardian, and that may have remained the case until she activates the insignia, indicating that she is a candidate. Reinhard immediately reacts to this by asking after her family details and how old she is. The age question implies Reinhard has a specific person she might be in mind when deciding he has to take custody of her. If he's right, then who is Felt really? When Romji later learns of Reinhard's involvement, he makes a comment about how it just had to be the Astrea family that found her. This suggests he has knowledge of Felt's origin and understands that it involves the Astreas in some way. If so, why does Felt not know this about herself? Was Romji trying to protect her from something, or fulfill some promise? Finally, what happened to the king and his family? It's described as an epidemic hitting the castle and the king going into hiding, and yet rather than be suspicious or investigate, or whatever else might be a normal response to regicide, the nation is plunging ahead with the candidate selection process. Partially, this seems due to the Dragonstone, which must be transmitting the will of the dragon and is calling the shots for the selection process to some degree. But having the whole family wiped out, which sets up all the other events, seems like a mystery all its own, especially combined with Subaru's arrival and the increased activity of the witch's cult. So the workings of magic in the world of RE0 are varied and only somewhat explained. Some community members compiled every instance of magic incantations and the variations thereof, such as how Huma seems to invoke ice and Goa fire magic, with prefixes like Owl, El, and Ol changing the type of spell which results. But one thing you start to notice is the discrepancy between those who use magic words to cast and those who do not. Roz uses words Ol Goa to cast the air support on the forest maw beasts, but says nothing to Fly or to trade blows with Betty, while Betty never uses words at all. Ram does not speak words to use her wind magic most of the time, but she does to cast the cushion of air that breaks her and Subaru's fall. Rem uses words nearly every time she uses magic. Just Huma for the ineffective shield, Al Huma for ice shards, El Huma to turn cultist blood into spikes, and Ol Huma for the shard she summons up from the ground. However, Emilia and Puck seem to use very similar spells without any incantations at all. Emilia actually never says anything for any magic use that we see from her, and Puck only does so when demonstrating Shamak to Subaru. Betelgeuse likewise does not seem to need to say anything to use the unseen hand, though he does at times anyway to be theatrical, nor do the fingers when they cast fire spells or use their shadow teleport trick. However, Betelgeuse will chant to use the Earth Shield spell at the very end. Combining that with Puck saying Shamak out loud, and is it possible that incantations are necessary for magic outside of one's mastery? Emilia's lack of incantation one could ascribe to using spirit arts rather than her own mana, but we'll see Julius and Reinhard both invoke spirit arts for their sword-fighting power-ups, complete with magic words. However, Kruge does not need to for another type of magic, her divine protection of wind reading. There actually is a small collection of these abilities scattered among our characters, and they seem to function quite differently from the other magic we see. Kruge has her lie detecting, and Felt appears to have divine protection of wind that grants her great speed, which we learn from Elsa's thoughts while facing her. Reinhard has what Puck will call protection from arrows in the third of the shorts, and we can see it on display in his fight with Elsa. Then Otto has a soul of language, which lets him hear the voices of all other creatures. It may not be a divine protection like the others, but Ram also has her clairvoyance, which lets her see through the eyes of the creatures in the forest. These protections often have wind terms associated with them, and Ram does use wind spells, so maybe it counts. But these abilities appear to be something characters just have as a part of themselves. Felt likely doesn't even know she is using some kind of magic in the same way she doesn't know her real past. Moreover, divine protection implies something bestowed upon you. So, what are these abilities, and where do they come from? And what determines who does and doesn't have them? Another implicit magical mystery is why Emilia's magic is different between the frozen bond and the present. Puck will tell Subaru that she technically doesn't have magic of her own, but uses spirits. However, in Frozen Bond, she had her own magic, and was only just learning to use the spiritual arts. More dramatically, she also had the automatic blood-drinking ice blossom effect that is not active in the events of the main series. It wasn't something she could control in Frozen Bond, seemingly attacking any wound in the area regardless of what caused them. She'll even specifically try not to use magic in the encounter with the traffickers, but they will bloom all the same until Puck renders her unconscious. She will also have an instance of losing control of her magic, but nothing like that happens in the main series. She has switched to using spiritual arts by the time Subaru meets her, but is that enough to explain why her original magic is not in use anymore? A possibly related mystery is why Puck needed the magical release period which caused the events of Memory Snow. He'll say quite plainly that he used up all of his mana in the fight with Elsa just a week before, so if it normally builds up enough to need venting twice a year, he surely can't be due already, right? So that raises a related question. Is the contract between Puck and Emilia the thing that contains her magic and keeps the ice blossoms from blooming or her losing control? And does he actually not use that magic directly, thus requiring the mana release period, which otherwise seems a bit incongruent? It would also explain why Emilia seems so determined to hide it at first in Memory Snow, and why she is so apologetic about the situation, as though it's her causing the problem rather than Puck. But we are never given a straight explanation for the change between then and now, and the ice blossoms remain mysterious, alongside the really immense power that she knows sleeps within her. There are some more unanswered questions concerning Emilia and Puck's contract. One is the green gem Emilia wears, which appears to be where Puck goes when he discorporates. However, it wasn't needed as part of their contract in Frozen Bond, and so must have been added later. Betty will touch it after Emilia is dead, and she comments that Puck won't come out now, and the crystal will shatter. However, he shows up where Subaru and Emilia were ejected, though it is at least half a day since Emilia died. He also manifests in his Beast of the End form and makes a comment about destroying the world, so he's clearly not in a weakened state. What then is the nature or purpose of this green gem? Does it limit Puck in some way, hence running out of mana while fighting Elsa, but able to destroy the world after it's broken? Is he only able to take that form if something happens to Emilia, as he also does in the second loop of the last arc? Possibly related is the sequence in the Frozen Bond when the head trafficker appears to serve as a vessel that Meliquara can put some of his power into, and thus be in two places at once. When Puck destroys some kind of core, burning the flesh to crush the odd, as he says, this version of Meliquara collapses. However, he shows up in full later and is much more powerful. Does this mean that the green gem and Puck are a similar arrangement, with his full self elsewhere? Hence why the beast form only comes out in the main series after a delay, and after Emilia seems to be dead? The world-destroying dead man switch is another mystery. When he bows out of the Elsa fight, he'll mention that if anything happens to her, he'll act according to his contract. And when explaining matters to Subaru later on, he'll indicate that he will now destroy the world in accordance with his contract. However, with whom would he have made such a contract? From Frozen Bond, we learn that he had some original prohibition against forming a contract with Emilia, an oath that he breaks. The inset titles indicate he is supposed to remain relatively uninvolved in her life. Is this then a consequence of him flaunting that prohibition? Because it doesn't seem like the kind of conditions Emilia would want in a contract for her, at least. So a couple more things to talk about and how magic works in the series. We'll address the powers associated with Satella and the cult in a later section, but here I do want to mention all the things which seem to affect Subaru differently than others. The memory wiping of the White Whale's fog does not affect his own memory, something he appears to be singular in. He'll likewise be immune to the whale's cry that invokes madness in many of those around him. Though not quite at first, he will be able to see the unseen hand of Betelgeuse. All of these powers are associated with Satella in some way, and Subaru's magical attribute being shadow likely also comes from her influence. Is that then enough to explain the way he is an exception to all these effects? Because there is another magic he shows immunity to, and that's Betty's door-crossing magic. He'll give the explanation of his flag-crushing luck, but is that all there is to it? Is there a connection uniting all the things about magic which have a unique outcome for him? Alongside this, why does Subaru have such poor control over his gate, but also such a strong affinity for spirits? Maybe these things are related, maybe not, but it makes him suitable for the trick he and Julius pull off against Betelgeuse at the very end. Where does this oddity come from, however? Is it related to Satella, or the fact that he comes from another world, or both? Finally, what are the conditions that update the so-called save point for how far he goes back when Return by Death activates? He is not actively choosing it, but does that mean someone else is? Or are there certain conditions which update it automatically? I made another video about the frequency of APAs in the series and what that could possibly symbolize, and 2 of these reset points are in front of the same APA vendor. But neither is at the beginning of what we would consider the start of the arc. He doesn't return to the very first place he entered the world in the first arc, but a little time into it. Likewise in the second arc, when he doesn't reset to the first time he wakes up in the mansion, but the second time, which means that the meeting with Betty where he gets mana drained never gets undone. The third reset point is the APA vendor again, and this is several days after he has come to the capital. Crucially, this means that the fiasco with the candidate selection also never gets undone. Through these 3, you could suppose that it is simply time-based, get far enough ahead of the last save point, and you update to a new one, but the 4th save point overturns this. He gets to the day or a day after the attack on the mansion in every loop before he dies, yet the last time this happens, he doesn't revert to the APA vendor, he goes back to just after the defeat of the White Whale. That would seem to suggest that the save point updates when certain conditions are met. This makes the mystery of whether it is automatic or controlled by someone else rather interesting. Presumably, if someone can choose where it changes, that would be Satella, but that would mean she is choosing these points to specifically allow him to undo and redo certain outcomes. In the last arc, he doesn't reset far enough back to unmake the disaster with Emilia, but he does get enough time to stop the eventual attack of Betelgeuse and the cult. Likewise, the update in that arc means he doesn't have to go through defeating the whale again, it is completed. But one would think that both of these outcomes, stopping Betelgeuse and the whale, would run counter to Satella, right? They are her allies, or at least her creations, right? Of course, the mystery of what Satella even wants we can hardly consider at this point, and her rejection of Betelgeuse was certainly quite the shock to him. It may be that she is in control of the reset points and wants Subaru to pursue these outcomes for a reason that we can't guess. But what if the updating is automatic after all? This starts to stray into our next section, the concept of fate. Again, what if the save point updates automatically as the result of certain conditions being met? This could potentially explain the last change, where it moves ahead seemingly as a result of the whale's death rather than the time which elapses, and there would also then be no seeming contradiction in Satella preserving the death of her Maw-Beast. If so, it starts to raise questions about what conditions moved the save point in other instances. What if the first arc wasn't about Subaru saving Emilia and himself, but creating a condition in which Felt would meet Reinhard? What if the first meeting with Betty is important to preserve because her mana drain tells her something critical about Subaru? What if it's actually important that Subaru not get to redo the Royal Selection debacle because of how it changes his characterization down the line? What we are straying into is a little more of a metaphysical mystery about RE0, which is whether or not the concept of fate exists in this world. Subaru will make comments at times which suggest he thinks he is in a contest against Fate-sama, like there was some predetermined outcome that he is using Return by Death to overcome. There may be more to this than just rhetorical device. In the third loop of the first arc, we will actually see Felt steal the insignia from Emilia, and because Subaru was distracting her at the time, she'll first assume he was working to aid Felt. However, Subaru isn't around for the theft the other 3 times it happens, yet it happens all the same. He will help Emilia calm the lost little daughter of the Appa vendor in one loop, yet in a later loop when he isn't around, she will have helped the girl out anyway. Quite different paths still converge on some of the same points, which is a common feature of fate or destiny in storytelling. To diverge into a little meta-analysis for a moment, fate is also a good check on the power of time travel. Time travel is really too powerful of an ability for a story. There's a danger of erasing all the tension out of a narrative if any outcome can be reversed. Good time travel thus needs restrictions, and fate-like outcomes are one of the tools to restrict. If the story universe tends towards a certain direction regardless of the action of the time traveler, then their power is not omnipotent, and the story retains its tension. So is fate at work in the story, and does that have any bearing on how his save points update? I made another video on star references in RE0, and stars are often associated with fate or destiny. Is that just an accidental parallel? Perhaps related is the functionality of 2 items used by different groups: the Dragonstone that the rulers of the country consult, and the Gospel that Betelgeuse and company consult. Both appear to self-update, both are presumably the written will of the dragon and the witch respectively, and there is some expectation on those receiving the words that these items foretell of things to come. Betelgeuse is quite perplexed not to find any information about Subaru in his gospel, and the wise men refer to the writings on the stone as prophecies, and so fully expect to find a 5th candidate to begin the royal selection process. The question is, are these 2 updating with respect to one another? Are they each looking into the same possible future? Or are they in competition? Or do they even change at all in relation to what the other says? Both have the common thread of association with choosing people to fulfill certain roles. Betelgeuse expects the gospel to say something about Subaru and whether or not he could fill the seat of pride, and the Dragonstone has initiated a process to select a winner from 5 candidates to fill the seat of the kingdom's throne. We have no idea why the insignias choose certain people to be candidates, it's another mystery. Meanwhile, Betelgeuse's presumption about Subaru's candidacy comes from the amount of witch love scent which clings to him, and yet it has no trace in the gospel. Interestingly, Subaru's actions are potentially upsetting the whole selection process, maybe even both of them. By the end of the first season, he has forged an alliance between 3 of the candidates, and has created connections to the other 2, while on the witch side of things, he has seen the destruction of sloth and gluttony. Is he a spanner in the works to the royal selection and/or the gospel? Or is this potentially another example of some fate-like force at work in the series? Because, for me, one of the biggest mysteries about the way this story is told is something that Subaru is not doing. RE0 diverges from isekai tropes in a lot of ways, and rather intentionally defies our expectations, or even outright attacks the genre. As part of this process, it has left the original mystery of the series behind, which is why was Subaru summoned, and what does the witch want with him? It's a huge departure from standard isekai to never have this mystery addressed. In every other example I know of, it is either plain why someone showed up in another world and why, or because it isn't clear, the summoned character seeks an answer to that mystery in an ongoing way. Subaru, though, has never wondered or tried to find out more about why he is there. It seems clear Satella is behind his summoning and the return by death power, and clear that she doesn't want other people to know he has that power, but that is the extent of it. But why bother with someone from another world? Is it their ignorance of this world that is useful? Are some of the odd qualities of Subaru's relationship to magic a result of being from Earth? And are they desirable? Or is something about the way Satella was sealed preventing her from interacting with those in this world in certain ways, and Subaru is thus a loophole? Or does fate really exist for this world, with those from the outside able to defy it, as Subaru seems eager to do? Certainly, he has disrupted the way the selection process would normally have unfolded, keeping Emilia in the running 3 different times, and now uniting competing factions for a time. Is this actually why he was summoned to the world? Let's move on to a few additional things about Emilia. First of all, what is the significance of her constant use of old-fashioned language? Subaru points it out many times, even outside the main series. We're meant to notice that her vocabulary hails from some earlier time period. However, actual older beings we meet, like Puck and Betty, do not have the same tendency. Before the second OVA came out, we were speculating that she may have grown up in isolation, perhaps raised by someone very old who imparted those speech patterns to her. Or else she herself was quite old and had been sequestered from the world for a long time. Certainly the constant prejudice against her would be cause enough to hide out until the selection process brought her to civilization. Then Frozen Bond came out, and we learned she has been frozen in the crystal for some unknown amount of time. Immediately, we wonder if that means her speaking pattern was also frozen in time, and if so, it strongly implies that she learned to speak in a much earlier time period. Betty and Puck have been awake all along and have adjusted their speech to the changing times. Is it possible that Emilia's speech was appropriate when she went into the crystal, but she just hasn't been awake and around other people long enough to adjust to modern conventions? There are a lot of examples of her lack of social experience, which, as I alluded to earlier, suggests that she has not been unfrozen for very long. Alongside this are suggestions that she has some childlike tendencies. Ram and Betty both refer to her as though she were a child, or at least undeveloped in her understanding of the world. The first of the shorts will feature her not liking green peppers, which is a Japanese trope for picky eaters akin to the Western one of kids not liking broccoli. The names she gives to places on the map she makes in Frozen Bond were onomatopoeia, childish names, hence Puck wondering if she won't be embarrassed if someone else sees it. It all seems to be explained by the end of Frozen Bond after we see her first unfrozen. She remembers nothing from before that, save for 3 flashes of memory, and is very childlike and confused just after awakening. Thus, in some ways it seems her personality is still undeveloped, and she hasn't had much social experience to progress it. Parts of her are responsible and adult-like, but other parts are not. What explains this dichotomy for Emilia? To then go back almost all the way to the beginning, why does she first give her name as Satella? This was the cause of much speculation and counter-speculation during our discussions. Was it an act of giving up? Of assuming that Subaru would react the way anyone would who recognized the name? He will later conclude from Betty's input that she might have been trying to appear insane, as that would let her bow out of the selection process after she couldn't recover the insignia. She does startle a moment when Subaru calls her Satella in that first loop, and says she'll have to apologize to him if they do recover her insignia. Puck will be shocked that she gave her name thus, saying that she had bad taste, which makes it sound like a joke, though once we see the rest of the series, we'll learn that Emilia doesn't really make jokes. When Subaru calls her by that name in the third loop and she is so angry with him, she will echo Puck's sentiment. Whoever told him to say that has bad taste. Or is she being sincere when she says it the first time, and Puck is shocked at her trusting the stranger, hence the bad taste? Was it meant to push Subaru away, or pull him closer? Or, if not exactly a question of being sincere, perhaps a situation where she doesn't truly know, but fears there may be a kernel of truth to it? After all, one of the biggest reveals from Frozen Bond is that Emilia has amnesia for what I guess is the majority of her lifespan, and was sealed for an unknown length of time besides. Further, she knows she is home to some terrible power that she struggles to control, and yet she did not even know she was a half-elf until Meliquara told her. Does Emilia harbor some fear that the link between Satella and herself is more than just aesthetic? With what we know about her at this point, her decision to give her name as Satella rather than Emilia is rather mysterious. So let's go ahead and talk about Satella herself. Our information on her is spotty, and the most direct statements come from Betty, half of which sound like the lines out of a legend. We do learn that Satella was sealed rather than killed in the past, perhaps because of what Betty says about her body never withering, weakening, or dying. This sealing was carried out by a dragon, a warrior, and a sage. The dragon, we can perhaps guess, is the same one that is connected to Lagunica, but who is the warrior, and who is the sage? Someone wondered if the line of master swordsmen that Teresia and now Reinhard belong to might have had their origin in this warrior. Is that a possibility? Is it possible that Flugel is the sage, he who planted the giant tree centuries ago? Whether that is Flugel's identity or not, we do have the mystery of why he planted said tree in the first place. But even more perplexing is the carving on the tree Subaru finds, which suggests Flugel also came from Earth. What is going on there? Quite aside from the possibility that Subaru is but one of many summoned into this world, if Flugel planted the tree, then it stands to reason he couldn't also have carved that himself, right? Those etchings would have needed to happen relatively recently to be on the outside and bottom of the existing tree. Unless, of course, the tree is unique for more than just its size and became fully grown rapidly. Or Flugel is still around somehow. Or someone else did the carving. And again, why is the tree there? I can't be the only person who finds it interesting that a guy from Earth plants an out-of-place giant tree that will later be used by another guy from Earth to take out the white whale, right? I'll throw another one in here that may be completely unrelated, but it amuses me to think about it. Why do burgers exist in this world? That's rather anachronistic from otherwise late medieval or early Renaissance tech society. Any chance then that Flugel did come from Earth sometime in the past and is thus responsible for their introduction? Is this seeming oddity actually a clue to the other mystery? Now, the three who sealed Satella aside, what about the other things that Betty says? One is that Satella was starved for love, which is something I am guessing is pretty important. Another is that bit about her body never withering. Okay, where is this undying body? Then there is the part about devouring the 6 witches who bore the names of the deadly sins, which I'll get to in a moment, after which Satella drained half the world dry. What does that mean, to drain the world dry? We've seen one kind of drain from Betty herself, the mana drain she inflicts on Subaru, and she indicates that it's not something many would be able to do. The mechanism of the curse from the Olgarm also functions like a type of mana drain, and Satella supposedly is responsible for the existence of maw beasts. But there's also the ice blossoms that popped up around Emilia in the Frozen Bond, which don't drain mana but blood, a rather horrifying display. Or is it none of these, and some further and more fearsome act is implied by Betty's words? So let's go back to that bit about devouring the other witches and how that might interact with the sins. Betelgeuse's unseen hand is a power that originates from Satella, evidenced by Puck's comment about how he would need to summon 1,000 such hands to defeat him, half as much as Satella could. This implies that Satella had her own, much more powerful version of the unseen hand, and we do mostly see her influence in the story represented by similar imagery. Satella absorbed the power of 6 other witches who presumably mapped to the 6 other deadly sins. Satella is the Witch of Envy, and so perhaps the others are the Witch of Wrath and the Witch of Lust, and so on. In the case of Betelgeuse's unseen hand, does that mean it comes originally from the Witch of Sloth? and that is a power Satella absorbed from that witch. Likewise for the erasing fog of the white whale. Puck will refer to it as gluttony at the end of one arc, so is that memory-altering power something that hails from the Witch of Gluttony? And on the subject of the white whale, is the whale gluttony in the same way that Betelgeuse is sloth? Or are archbishops of the sins different than some kind of manifestation of said sin? After all, the whale is dead by the end of the series, and yet Rem appears to be erased in a similar manner to the whale's fog. Does that imply there is some other manifestation, or an archbishop of gluttony kicking around somewhere? Or, if we assume that the memory erasing power comes from Satella in the same way that the unseen hand seems to, does that mean Satella herself is behind whatever has happened to Rem? Maybe related to this is Betelgeuse's body hopping. Is that part of the authority of sloth, or something that all sin archbishops are capable of? The unseen hands seem like they are on theme for sloth. It's literally hands doing work for you, truly slothful. Jumping into other people's bodies to use them as your own seems consistent with sloth as well, but it never gets the whole invocation of authority of sloth treatment. Is it possible this is a power shared among those with Satella's favor? One could argue that Subaru's power of return by death is a variation on this. He is hopping back to an earlier version of his body and taking his mind with him. The ordeal that Betelgeuse was hoping to carry out seemed to involve using Emilia as a vessel for Satella in the same way his fingers were a vessel for him, so there is that precedent as well. If true, then Rem's disappearance after the white whale was killed may be related to this body hopping, that the memory-erasing fog power perhaps did not die with the whale at all and now resides elsewhere. Certainly, what has happened to Rem is the major mystery that we leave off on. But this idea that the sin powers come from Satella prompts a further question. Does this mean she had her own version of return by death? Is that possibly why she had to be sealed rather than just killed outright, when the sage, warrior, and dragon saw fit to remove her? Just going up against someone powerful with return by death seems like a daunting prospect. Never mind any other powers Satella had. If there's anything to this, then the fear she generates seems rather well earned. And there is the gospel beyond what we've already mentioned. Felix and TV react rather adversely when Subaru shows the gospel to them. Combining that with their anecdote about the gospel coming to people who then join the cult, it appears that the book has powers of suggestion, or maybe hypnosis. Furthermore, Betelgeuse seems to only truly be defeated after Subaru writes Owari in his gospel. Does the book actually have some kind of power over its followers, even if it's just the power of persuasion? Last of all, I just want to collect some of the mysteries which came up in the Frozen Bond OVA that I haven't already covered. This is both the earliest part of the story we have gotten to see, and also the most recent addition to our understanding, yet it really takes that lore Hydra creating more questions and answers bit to the extreme. Leaving aside the massive reveal of Emilia having amnesia, or how she ended up frozen, what is the significance of the 3 flashes of memory we see from her? One is plainly the freezing of the elves in the forest, but is she witnessing this happening? Is she causing it? Is she also affected by it? Then there is the image of this elf who has the same silver hair as Emilia and is wearing the same hair decoration we'll see her sporting at all times. The angle of the memory implies the perspective of someone shorter or perhaps younger than the short-haired elf. Could this be Emilia's mother? Older sister? Some other relation? Lastly, the image of what surely must be a young Betelgeuse, or at least the younger version of the body we are most familiar with. He's crying and taking the hand of the person having the memory, and there is just enough of a purple scalloped sleeve hem in the shot to presume that it is Emilia's hand he is taking while she is wearing the outfit we most associate with her. That wardrobe detail is a mystery all its own, since she doesn't wear anything like that in Frozen Bond, but what about the rest of the context? Is this Betelgeuse in his youth? How long ago could this memory have taken place? Why is he in tears? At the very end of the main series, he'll make a comment about how he hasn't forgotten even a single moment of the things Satella did for him. Is that related at all to this memory? Did he think he's found Satella again in pre-frozen Emilia, thus overwhelming him with emotion? Or does this go much further back into the past? I'm also curious why Emilia knows how to fight and wield magic despite being such a babe in the woods when she was sprung from the frozen crystal. What exactly was she up to before the freezing happened that explains these abilities and these memories? To touch on some of the other characters a moment, who is the guy with all the rings? He knows enough to conclude that Puck is the beast of the end, and is someone Puck knew to come to before the trafficker returned to seek revenge. He seems like someone with knowledge above that of a simple one-shot character to me, so maybe he'll return. But even if not, what is the lore behind people knowing that Puck is the beast of the end? Meliquara will mention him alongside the 4 great contaminants as well, so what exactly is Puck anyway? Also for Puck, who did he promise not to form a contract with Emilia? Is it the same person behind the titles we see playing over various parts of the work? They seem to know that Puck would want to get involved and are warning or threatening him with consequences if taken too far. And despite breaking that oath, he still won't reveal who it is with, just to pile on the mystery. Both those words and Puck's emotional state when he springs Emilia from the crystal imply that he is invested in her before they meet, or at least meet from Emilia's point of view. He'll say that he was looking for her for so long and is tearfully apologetic about leaving her alone. So who was Emilia to him before the events of the frozen bond? Puck will defy Meliquara when he implies Emilia must be destroyed, and one of the things he will say is that Emilia was born to be happy, that she was someone who was wanted. What in the world does that mean, other than Puck has some knowledge of her origin that he clearly has not shared? Finally, the fiery horse boy Meliquara. He is a great spirit like Puck, it would seem, and one vigilant against the potential threat of the witch returning to the world. How many other such great spirits are there? Do they all have some kind of mission, like both Puck and Meliquara seem to? Emilia will introduce Puck to the selection hall as a great spirit who controls fire. That description seems like it better fits Meliquara, no? Did Puck take over his title or something by being victorious at the end of Frozen Bond? Can spirits even be eliminated like that? Why, too, is Meliquara poking around the forest in the first place? He references the ice blooms, then mentions his worry about the witch. Puck will state that he is acting as a front for Emilia, but do Meliquara's words imply that Satella was an icy girl herself? Hence why Meliquara is drawn to the unnatural winter of that forest? Okay then, I think that's enough mystery. It's not everything that's unexplained, of course, but this covers everything I expect to learn more about in the upcoming second season. We're going to be discussing the new episodes on stream the day they happen, and in Discord all the rest of the time, so feel free to join us.